This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Next time you're driving, take a look around. You might notice you're being watched. From cameras atop traffic lights to license plate readers, surveillance technology has quietly crept into cities and towns across the state. Today, we're taking a look at surveillance in Connecticut and asking why organizations are getting more and more worried about how these devices are used. Can mass surveillance and civil liberties coexist? Join the conversation Where We Live right after the news. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen.
Somebody hears you, you know that, you know that.
Video surveillance has quickly become a fact of life, from seeing yourself enter a supermarket to speed cameras up and down the highway. Supporters say that surveillance helps solve crimes, but opponents note that these technologies often infringe on civil liberties and that it can be unclear what's happening with all the data. Today, we'll be covering the surveillance technologies appearing in your neighborhood and around the United States, from license plate readers to video doorbells. We'll also hear about efforts to preserve privacy and document these cameras. Joining us now is Matthew Guariglia. He's a senior policy analyst for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit working on issues of surveillance and policing. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Connecticut.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have concerns about cameras popping up in your community. Give us a call, 888-720-9677. You can also find us online at Where We Live or shoot us an email, wherewelive@ctpublic.org. So Matthew, I do want to start from the beginning here. When did video surveillance technologies become so prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, they've been emerging for a long time. I mean, surveillance cameras have been around forever. Security cameras that, backed up to a VCR in your garage were kind of a thing that was for rich people in big fancy houses for a long time. And I think the advent of kind of what we call the Internet of Things, which are, internet connected, easy to use devices, have really kind of democratized surveillance so that anybody, for a little bit of money can go online, order a camera, put it up in front of their house. So I would say really one of the exacerbating incidents was COVID, where a lot of people were stuck at home. There was kind of a backlash to the protests of 2020 and a spike in crime, which necessitated, according to pro-surveillance people and a lot of police, the buildup of surveillance infrastructure, both at a city level, but also on our individual homes.
And so it sounds like basics, quotations around basic security is being used, or that's the philosophy behind most people who want to have the surveillance technology. But what are these technologies normally used for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of police, when they make the pitch, right? Like, we need to put more cameras up. There's crime, therefore cameras. They're doing a calculus. That is that voters are expecting them to be proactive on crime, and addressing the root causes of crime is actually very hard. Like, deep social conditions create crime. And it's hard to address those. And so what's a lot easier to do is to say, let's throw some money at the problem. Let's seem proactive. Let's put up some cameras. And so the pitch is usually, we put up cameras, crime goes down. And they don't really ever explain how or why. And a lot of times there's this assumption that cameras will prevent crime, that people will see a camera and they're not going to, whether that camera is in a parking garage or on your front door, they're going to see a camera and they're going to stop. But I don't see a lot of evidence that that's true. And I think the amount of security camera we've seen of footage of crime happening is kind of evidence of that. And so if it doesn't prevent crime, then what does it do? Well, the other thing that, video footage can do is it can help secure convictions. Like, here's some really clear evidence. But there's not a lot of evidence either that individual convictions lower crime rates either. Like putting one person away does not make a city safer altogether. Not like addressing root causes of crime. And so, crime, it goes ups and down, it ebbs and flows. And cameras don't really have a huge role to play in that. And yet they become central to the solution that lawmakers offer. When people say, I want safety, lawmakers here, I want more policing and more surveillance.
Well, a lot of focus on crime, of course, and I think when we think about crime, cars, license plates, and that's the kind of information that I think we get asked to inform if we know the car model or the license plate number, and this can also be related to traffic as well, where I think another area that we've seen that became more prevalent, especially in recent months, is the automatic license plate readers. So, can you tell us what are they, and are they the same thing as speed cameras?
Yeah, the simple answer is no, they're not the same thing as speed cameras. License plate readers are fully functioning cameras, but they are kind of upgraded with a sort of AI machine learning style analytics, which reads and records every license plate that goes by. They can get things wrong. They sometimes do. We've seen people get pulled out of their car by gunpoint by police officers because an ALPR misread a license plate. And I think one of the important things to note is there's a big difference in how ALPRs use or across the country. Sometimes the ALPR you encounter will be monitoring your license plate when you pull into a parking garage because it's reading your plate and it's deciding whether or not to open the gate to you. But we also see a wide range in terms of how cities and police are using it, where there's a big difference, I think, between hot lists. So, like if a car is stolen, police will make a hot list with that car. And if that car drives past an automated license plate reader, they'll get an alert. Here's the stolen car, just drove past this intersection. But how we mostly see it's used these days is kind of eradicated the idea of individualized suspicion and is really teetering on the prospect of mass surveillance. So it's recording every license plate that goes by, every camera, and sometimes holding that data indefinitely. And what's really concerning about this is that these cameras are networked. It's not just like walking past one security camera once, and they can pinpoint you at one place at one time. And so what? But these license plate readers are really allowing cities to monitor your movement throughout the day. Because if you're going through 15 intersections on your way to work and all 15 of those intersections have a license plate reader and record you going through it, you could essentially recreate somebody's entire day. And because there's no individualized suspicion, they don't suspect you specifically of a crime, it's kind of the definition of mass surveillance.
And so when we're talking about recording, are we talking about images, like still images, video, or also audio?
So most license plate readers are just still images. They are mostly triggered by and collecting license plates, but we have seen a number of these companies move into more generalized surveillance photography. So, for instance, there was just a case like last week in Georgia where a motorcyclist was riding with a cell phone in his hand, which you should not do. It is not safe. But a flock camera caught him doing that, and he got a ticket in the mail, and the ticket said, caught by a flock camera. Flock as a company says that their cameras do not do generalized traffic enforcement. They only record license plates. So already we're seeing a kind of mission creep. We've seen a number of proposals over the years where companies that make license plate readers are also going to start to use machine learning and AI to look for dents and scratches on the car. So it's not just looking for specific license plates. It's, looking for a red car with a dent in the fender and one headlight out. That is the level of specificity that police can use when searching through their database of this data recorded by license plate readers.
Well, you just mentioned the phrase mission creep. So can you talk about the mission creep of these technologies? How do you define that and how are we seeing it?
Yeah. I mean, we see mission creep every day. What mission creep is essentially is, police will justify the purchase of some of this equipment by saying that, it's essential for catching the most serious criminals, right? There are very serious crimes out there in society, and we need this really, really invasive surveillance technology that blankets the city to find those crimes. But what we see is that those crimes are actually quite rare. And in the meantime, that surveillance infrastructure doesn't sit dormant. They use it. They use it every day. And so surveillance is just that. It's infrastructure. Once you put it up, it's going to be used. And so this technology that was justified by saying it's going to find only the most serious crimes and criminals ends up being used to do kind of everyday enforcement. And this is mission creep, right? It was purchased and justified by saying it was going to be used for one specific serious purpose, but then it gets used to find vandals outside the high school.
Well, I think earlier you mentioned that flock cameras were not really, their original purpose was not to catch quote unquote crime in process. It's more to capture the images of license plates. So, but there's also sort of under that umbrella, there's also the flock raven, which they detect audio. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Is audio being captured, and if so, what are they being used for?
Yeah. I mean, and this is part of the process of all of these companies kind of getting into vertical integration. They start out selling kind of one product and they kind of move into other devices and other platforms so that when they sell things to a police department, they're kind of upselling them. They're always saying, hey, why don't you tack on this other thing as well? And Flock Raven is definitely part of that. So it's designed to be acoustic gunshot detection. So it supposedly it listens for loud noises that may be gunshots and it kind of triangulates them. So if there's a loud popping noise, police will get an alert, maybe a gunshot around this area in the city. Acoustic gunshot detection has been known to be incredibly flawed. Fireworks and car backfires set them off a lot. And in fact, we've seen instances where police have shot at children thinking they were showing up to a gunfight and showing up to a bunch of kids shooting off fireworks. That's the kind of thing that acoustic gunshot detections have enabled. But Flock Raven is a device that is often mounted underneath the solar panel that power Flock cameras. And they listen for gunshots, but Flock is also experimenting with a new product that they're threatening to roll out called distress detection, which is they are going to listen for human voices in distress. I think the way they originally pitched it is that if one of these devices hears screaming, they will alert police of screaming in a specific location. I think need to even say how many ways this can go wrong. But in addition to, police showing up because children are shouting and screaming, there is also the real concern that, like, in many states, there are pretty strict privacy laws that prevent people from being recorded without their knowledge. And it's yet unclear how Flock intends to roll out this product while staying inside the lines of those laws.
Well, it sounds like it's sort of a mix of using the technology and having to assess with your own sort of, your eyes and your ears witnessing the situation. And we've been focused a lot more on how law enforcement uses it. So I want to ask, how do police departments learn and get a hold of this technology? Are these companies selling them to them, or selling these devices to them individually? Is it for the departments, or what does that look like?
I'm so glad you asked this question because I really think that most Americans would be shocked if they saw the kind of internal emails I've seen inside police departments of just how aggressive the marketing campaigns that are coming at not just police but lawmakers too, elected officials, city council peoples are just getting just bombarded by very aggressive emails from these companies. Because you have to remember, these companies are, sometimes multi-billion-dollar tech companies. They are, essentially like a Facebook or like a Google. They have, big glossy marketing departments who are professionals who do this for a living. And one of the things we've seen that's really disturbing is the role police have played in spreading this technology. So police often act as salespeople and influencers for these tech companies. So police will sometimes get sent to other departments to be the ones to demonstrate how the tech works. It's not somebody from the company, not somebody from the marketing department, not an engineer from the company that's often doing the sales. It's another police officer who has used the technology for a while. And what's not disclosed is sometimes there is a real economic incentive for these officers to be doing this. I mean, we have seen a full range from officers actually getting paid, sometimes under the table and sometimes getting fired for it, for promoting police technology to other departments. And the other times we see is just there is a kind of pipeline of officers who get passed up for promotion or want to leave the force or want to retire, going to work in sales for these companies after they're done. And the way they prove themselves is what they've done while they're an active officer.
Well, we'll be speaking with a town councilor later on who's been at the forefront of those discussions. And before we do that, I want to talk about other forms of video surveillance as well. This past Super Bowl, the video doorbell company Ring aired this commercial.
One post of a dog's photo in the Ring app starts outdoor cameras looking for a match. Search Party from Ring uses AI to help families find lost dogs. Since launch, more than a dog a day has been reunited with their family.
Be a hero in your neighborhood with Search Party. Available to everyone for free right now.
So, Matthew, I think this kind of echoes a little bit about some of the themes that you were sharing earlier in terms of pitches. So what do you make of this commercial? What are some of the risks that you see here or hear here?
Wow, I can't tell you how my phone exploded when that ad came on the air, and everybody was like, "Wow, did you see that?" Because I've done a lot of work about Ring in the last few years. What I hear is a pretty typical trend, right? Which is you sell surveillance to somebody for one reason, either it's a town or it's an individual, and you say, "This is yours. This is your device. You do with it what you want." But it's connected to a larger network, and at any given moment, companies, other towns, your neighbors, even according to this, can reach essentially through your camera if you've opted in, and your device becomes a part of a larger network. And I think that is part of the backlash we've seen to that ad, is people didn't like the idea that their device could be used for purposes other than exactly why they bought it and they put it up. So the real concern here is that the technology to be able to find a specific dog, right? How it works is, your dog goes missing, you upload a photo of your dog to Search Party, and a kind of like AI algorithmic video analytics software goes through all of your neighbors' cameras who have opted in to look for your specific dog based on the photo that you've uploaded. Once again, anytime you hear the word product, you have to hear the word infrastructure. This infrastructure, if it can find dogs, can find people. It can. We know that Ring has been flirting with the idea of rolling out facial recognition for a long time. What we have here is a recipe for all these people to opt into a device and a product that can eventually be used by police to find people. So you could be enabling mass surveillance of your neighbors. You could be criminalizing people by opting into a program that you don't control. The company controls it. They get to switch when it searches for dogs and when it searches for people, and you have no real control of what changes on the device, even though you bought it and you put it up on your house.
We're going to be continuing this conversation after a quick break. You've been listening to Matthew Guariglia, who's a senior policy analyst for Electric Frontier Foundation, and Matthew will be staying with us. And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions about privacy. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us online at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Small black cameras have appeared across Connecticut in recent years. The cameras are mounted at intersections or on top of police cars. These automatic license plate readers, or ALPRs, have attracted significant attention, with some activists worrying about how the data is stored and if authorities could also use the cameras for immigration enforcement. Windsor recently introduced a bill suspending the use of these cameras, one of the first in the state. Joining us now is Ojala Naeem. She's the town councilor for Windsor that introduced the bill. Ojala, thanks for coming on Where We Live.
Thank you for having me.
And also still with us is Matthew Guariglia, who's the Senior Policy Analyst for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And for our listeners, let us know if you have privacy concerns as more cameras pop up in your community, or have you seen them? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or email us at wherewelive@ctpublic.org. So Ojala, you've been listening to the conversation. Was there anything that jumped out to you that you would like to react?
So much. I think the biggest thing here that Matthew was sharing is, technology is moving really fast, especially in the last several years. And a lot of times it will be introduced to towns or individuals as, really focusing on one element. And then over time, you start seeing that scope creep. Hey, we can also do X, Y, and Z. And it's hard to stay ahead of technology from a governance perspective. I think we are really struggling right now to say what's going to come next and how do we ensure that we have the right policies in place at the town, state, federal level to balance public safety with the privacy and civil rights of our citizens.
And how did the issue how was it brought to your attention in the first place?
So we've had flock cameras for several years now. And when they first came out, there wasn't really any reaction. There was also not a ton of kind of town engagement on it. At the time, there was no concerns around this option of, hey, what does this really mean? Last year, we had a resident sort of bring it to our attention, mainly because our ALPRs were run by a company called Flock, which was beginning to build a little bit of a negative reputation based on who was involved with the company. And so there were concerns around, hey, we have these cameras. How is the data being stored? Who is it being shared with? Who has access to it? And so the resident, who we'll be hearing a little bit from later on today, did a FOIA request to understand, what are people searching for? And that FOIA request showed not only the resident, but also our police chief and our council that we're getting hits from states like Texas for things that are not, legally you cannot be searching for in the state of Connecticut because of our Trust Act. And so that was a huge concern. And we realized we have national search turned on, which I think to Matt's earlier comments around, hey, this is a network. That is what makes it powerful, but it's also what makes it dangerous. And so our police chief quickly turned off national search. We restricted the data sharing to Connecticut police departments as well as some in Massachusetts because we're so close to the border. But that was just a start. Shortly after that, Flock, unfortunately, was in the news, or I should say fortunately, because it came out to our understanding that they were entering a pilot with the Department of Homeland Security and using data from police department cameras to share for enforcement purposes in other areas that, again, were not legal. So I think that was a little bit of the last blow. And we took a step back in our Health and Safety Committee and said, hey, we really need to figure out how to stay ahead of not just Flock as a potential bad company, but really at the core of it, what are the challenges with these ALPRs? Like, how is data being controlled and restricted? How do we want it to be controlled and restricted? What do we want these cameras to be used for? And so we created a policy through our Health and Safety Committee to really put some restrictions around the use of ALPRs and similar technologies, red light cameras, et cetera. That was sort of step one. Step two was having more conversations with our public. We were getting, town council meetings, you get a few people showing up for public comment here and there. We had, 30, 40, 50 people showing up because of their concerns on what this means from a mass surveillance perspective. And, we did a public forum with them where we really asked them, hey, let's step back from just this company in particular and these cameras in particular. We really need to understand, what do we as a town value? What do we want to make sure we have from a safety and security perspective? But what do we want to make sure we don't do and don't have from a civil rights and privacy perspective? So it's been a long process over the course of the last year, but we now have a policy in place in town. We then recognize that, hey, our contract with Flock does not meet that policy. And that led us to suspend use of the cameras. So we turned them off while our town manager goes and has conversations with the company to understand, are they willing to meet our requirements? And if not, we look at alternative options if this is something we want to continue with.
Well, of course, work in progress, and sounds like sort of a mixture of the town and the community working together, making this happen. And this is such a gray area still that we're sort of getting ourselves into. And sounds like you were able to sort of find a balance. And I use balance loosely just because we still don't really know exactly, right, how this data is being used. But what was that like in terms of trying to appreciate the good that this accessibility is trying to give? However, on the flip side, there could be a lot of bad because this data is readily accessible.
Yeah, not easy to start, right? It is tough to say, hey, we want to make sure that concerns of public safety are being addressed. But I think to Matt's earlier points, there's also confusion around how this works from a public safety perspective. It is not a deterrent. I would absolutely agree. Just because we have these in town doesn't mean that people are staying away from coming into our town and committing any types of crimes. What it does help with is solving crimes, and we have seen that happen. Our police officers were using it on a daily basis, just from anything from a BOLO, missing person, et cetera, perspective, car robberies, anything of that sort. So it's tricky because you don't want to take away tools and potentially make it harder to solve crimes and extend runways, sometimes where it could be really critical. But it just felt like such a heavy infringement on privacy and individual rights. I think the more I thought about it, and I think this is a huge difference between ALPRs and red light cameras, ALPRs are constantly monitoring you. They are tracking you everywhere you're going. It's not just because your license plate matched some sort of alert that was put out on that license plate. You're being monitored at all times, and that data is being stored, for us, 30 days was what was in our contract. And with red light cameras, if you're speeding, then they're capturing your plate. And so huge difference between kind of the scope of impact. So it was really challenging, and it continues to be challenging. And I don't think that this is just the end of it. I think technologies are going to continue to evolve with the AI kind of rise in the last couple of years. We're going to see even, I'll say, crazier, futuristic sci-fi versions of technology coming out. And so I think it's important for us to really understand, like, what are our values? What do we need to make sure we're putting into place from, respecting the rights and privacies of our citizens? And how do we bring that into play as we look at future technologies to come as well?
Well, and Matthew, I know you've been nodding to a lot of what Ojala just shared here and mentioning sort of the scope of impact. And one of the potential impacts and concerns that we've been hearing about is immigration enforcement assessing the ALPR data. So can you talk about how are they doing this? Are they doing this?
Yeah. And I mean, this is where it's important to know, and Flock will say this very readily, that they don't actually have any agreements or contracts with the Department of Homeland Security or ICE, right? Like that's so all the enforcement that's being done is not being done directly. What's happening is ICE is going to other law enforcement agencies, federal or often like local police departments with sympathetic people at them, and they're asking them, hey, can you run these plates for us? And so oftentimes what's happening is, especially with the national lookup tool, is you could have law enforcement here in Georgia or in Florida or anywhere, and ICE can say, hey, can you run these plates and can you do a national query for us? Can you look up nationwide if this car has ever driven past a flock camera? But even when you restrict it to like your area, so if, just Connecticut even, all it takes is kind of one sympathetic person at one Connecticut police station to be approached by ICE, and they will run those searches for them. And so it's really hard to actually get to the root of how to restrict these devices and make sure that they're not used for the purposes that people don't want them to be used for. And that's why I really think that it's important that a lot of towns, I mean, I think at most recent count, somebody said it was like over 60 cities and towns across the United States have canceled their contracts with Flock. But at the same time, I will warn that, the other companies that make automated license plate readers do very similar things. I mean, Flock has gotten a lot of heat lately, but just because they are top of mind does not mean the alternatives are a lot safer.
Well, I do want to make a note here that Kevin Kane, who's the Director of Government Affairs for Flock Safety, gave this statement during public's testimony for Connecticut Senate Bill 4. So I'm going to be reading this and probably ask you both for sort of your thoughts. So this statement was made by Kevin Kane. He says, Flock Safety has already developed and made available to all customers specific protections for queries related to immigration and reproductive rights. Once these filters are applied, these automatically prevent any queries related to immigration enforcement or reproductive care, and our audit laws add an additional layer of oversight to ensure proper use of this technology. Finally, regarding federal agency use of our system, I want to note that federal agencies are not part of any broader sharing network to include both in the state and nationwide. Any federal agency requesting access to any specific data must submit an individual request that allows communities to accept or reject that request. Put simply, your community will not share data with federal agencies unless they choose to do so. So again, this is Kevin Kane, the Director of Government Affairs for Flock Safety. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, unless they choose to do so, is doing a lot of work there, because Flock has copied a tactic that we've seen a lot of surveillance companies do, which is they wash their hands of anything that their customers might do with that, right? Like, hey, we don't say this is a device that should be used for immigration enforcement. We don't say that, you should use Flock cameras. It's a great way to try to find people accessing reproductive health care over state lines. And if it is used that way, that's on the department. They are really kind of passing the buck for a harm that their technology is, by design, enabling.
Quick response, Ojala.
Yeah, I think at the core of it, public safety and privacy are not mutually exclusive, right? What bridges them is trust. And I think Flock's statement is requiring us to say, we trust that there are no bad actors right now in law enforcement agencies across the country. And that is really hard to do when you talk about it at a national level. Someone might not be putting in a search for reproductive rights, but they might reframe it as just like fender bender or something. You're still searching the plate, right? And the plate data is still being provided to you. So it's really easy to bypass that. And to Matt's point, that last piece of what you read, it's kind of wiping their hands clean and saying it's not us. We're doing everything right. It's other bad actors that if they choose to do so, that's on them.
And so can you tell us more about the bill that Windsor passed recently?
Yeah, so we put a new policy in place that really focused around a few core pillars. The first was making sure there's clarity around data ownership and control, how long data gets stored for, who has the sole right over it, which would be the town, and so that it is not being shared without the town's clear, approval with any other area or any other agency or any other police department in the state. We put some policy, structure around how long is it used for, what are the use cases? So being very clear that, anything that is covered by a Trust Act, which includes immigration, abortion, reproductive rights, that these technologies in our town are not used for those purposes. And then also oversight and accountability. So, how are we making sure that we have the right things in place within our police department, from a auditing perspective, from tracking who's accessing any of the data even within our police department and what they're accessing it for. But ultimately, a lot of the kind of pushback we got even after putting the policy forward was, what happens? You can put this in place, but what happens when the company decides not to abide by it? What kind of leverages do we have to say, okay, you're not following our rules, so what happens next? And in the case of Flock, you're not meeting our requirements, so we're going to have to suspend this until we figure out how to make it work, if that's possible.
Well, and Matthew, what are you seeing of other municipalities doing around the country? Is it similar? Because I believe towns can cancel contracts with Flock, but sometimes Flock can refuse to take them down.
So that's what we've been seeing is, if a town cancels the contract with Flock, the question becomes who's responsible for taking down the cameras? And oftentimes Flock will kind of wash their hands of that responsibility is what we've seen. And so, and then the question becomes like, okay, so the contract is off, but the cameras are still up. Are they still on? Are they still collecting data? And even though the contract with Windsor, for instance, is canceled, could other departments still be sending queries to your devices? And so what we've seen actually is, I believe in Illinois, the local police had to get up on ladders and put garbage bags and duct tape over the cameras after they had canceled the contract. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing this trend of a lot of contracts being canceled. Probably a lot more will come. And then the question becomes like, how do we actually dismantle this network?
When I want to end with Ojala here and talk about what have you been hearing from constituents about ALPRs, and also have a question. Christopher on Facebook asked, who should folks reach out to if they want flock cameras out of their town?
Sure. So to the first question, we're hearing pretty strongly that they do not want flock in town. Flock's now built itself a reputation, and I think the Super Bowl ad was the kind of cherry on top. But they want to make sure their privacy is protected. They want to make sure that we're not opening up the doors for misuse of data. So we've got a lot to look at beyond just license plate readers, right? Every single piece of technology we bring into our town, we got to make sure that it's meeting those criteria. As far as who should you reach out to your elected officials at the local level. You may already have cameras. There's ways to check that online. I'm sure next speakers will talk about that a little bit. But reach out to your local officials. This was not on my bingo card for 2025 and going into 2026, but it was through the advocacy of residents in town that really just did not let this go. They, started as one you'll hear from Eric Weiner today, and then kind of grew a kind of coalition of people to say, hey, let me raise awareness on what's going on, and you should come out to a town council meeting and let your electeds know that this is a concern. So that works, and I'm so happy to see that work, because we don't hear about that enough today when it comes to government and civic engagement. But this was just a really beautiful sort of example of how civic engagement and government should be working.
Well, and then real quickly, any next steps after this bill?
So right now, I know the state is looking at some additional policies around, enforcement of certain pieces for ALPRs and other sort of cameras. So we're kind of monitoring that. We're also having conversations with Flock to see if they're going to be willing to change the contract. And if they are, what does that look like? And is that something that we want to move forward with or not?
Ojala Naeem, who's a town councilor for Windsor, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll continue our conversation on surveillance after a quick break. This is Where We Live. I'm Catherine Shen. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're covering surveillance and the creep of video cameras into all aspects of our lives. But some communities and citizens are pushing back. Websites like DFlock have hundreds of users working to catalog these cameras through Freedom of Information requests or by surveying neighborhoods. Armand Hidari is a resident of West Hartford. He's with us now to speak about his experiences. Armand, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Eric Weiner. He's a resident of Windsor who's also been working to bring more attention to the automated license plate readers, or ALPRs. Thank you so much, Eric, for being here.
You're welcome.
And of course, you've been listening to Matthew Guariglia, who's the Senior Policy Analyst for Electronic Frontier Foundation, who is still with us. And so, Eric and Armand, you've both been sort of listening to the conversation this hour. Was there anything that jumped out to you that you would like to respond to? I'll go with Eric first.
Yeah. Listening to the whole path of towns, cities, states adopting technology, it dawned on me that we take a strange approach. We accept whatever the technology companies are going to give to us without asking, do they do harm? If you were to have a new medical device, what is the testing going to be? Well, it's going to be first that, does this hurt the patient? Here, we just assume everything's going to be fine and then move forward. And when you're talking about core civil rights, that sounds backwards to me.
Yes, I would agree. And I think one of the things that makes assessing the cost-benefit so difficult in the case of this kind of technology is we're not even sure what the full extent of the data use is.
And can you both tell me when Flock was first brought to your attention?
I first took note of Flock back in 2021. There was a memo from our police chief to our town council saying they got a grant to put in a few, I think it was 4 or 5 ALPRs, no cost to the town. It was a couple of sentences in a memo. There was no public discussion. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. But then I forgot about it. It was at the beginning of last year. I spent my career in Silicon Valley in reading the technical press. I started to see more articles about Flock. Then last May, there was a lot of press about a nationwide search that came from a sheriff's department in Texas, doing a nationwide search for a woman who had an abortion. And I thought to myself, hey, I wonder if Windsor's data was searched for that same thing. So I filed a FOIA request, and I asked for the audit log of all of the searches that were done of Windsor's data between April and May of last year. And I was shocked when I got back 590,000 searches of Windsor's data over a 9-week period. And our police chief was shocked. Working with Chief Melanson was actually a wonderful experience. He was very forthright. Doing the FOIA request was as it should be. The town did not fight on it. And he then stepped in and said, yeah, that's not right. I need to at least turn off these searches from Texas.
Well, and Matthew, I think we heard from Ojala earlier too, sort of echoing what Eric just shared here in terms of using data to track people having abortions out of state. We touched on immigration enforcement, but we did not touch on tracking people having abortions. Can you give us an idea of what's been going on with that?
Yeah. And I think that Texas case that was just brought up is actually a great example of something we were talking about earlier, where there are a million ways to hide, to obfuscate the real reason somebody is sending a request. And so, we also saw that request at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We've been doing a lot of public records requesting about this, trying to monitor what types of requests are going around the national queries. And we saw that request as well. And the way Flock defended that request was that it was just, they were searching for a missing woman, that the family was incredibly concerned that this was a missing woman case, that this wasn't really about abortion. But then once we got into the actual requests, what we saw was it was a woman who had administered a self-administered abortion and then had left. And so they were looking for her specifically because she had an abortion. There was a way of kind of framing it, of couching that search as being about a missing woman, when really it wasn't. And so there are a lot of ways. And if you've studied the kind of requests, these audit logs, you can see that there are a lot of ways of kind of massaging why you're really sending a request.
And Matthew, wasn't it the case that prosecutors were even involved in that case of abortion? So it wasn't just a search for somebody's welfare. They were going after her according to Texas law.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and then Armand, you're a part of this advocacy now. Why is it important for you to be able to do this?
Well, I think the thing that galvanizes me is actually the surprise I had to learning about the technology. I mean, I'm learning new things in this conversation, and just having listened to Matthew and Ojala earlier myself, and I know more than my neighbors and my community. I first learned about Flock from my brother-in-law who lives in Woodside, California. And he was very adamant that this was a bad thing, that all of this data is being harvested about us in order to catch needles in haystacks. And he's been fighting there for the past year. They're making slow progress. When I first learned about the technology, I thought, it doesn't really affect me here in Connecticut, though. And then I came back and started looking into it more. And lo and behold, we're spending taxpayer money on this technology. It's watching when you go to the doctor. It's watching when you go to the grocery store. It sees when your kids get off the school bus at home. And I think this is something that everyone can get behind, to being maybe not being the greatest thing for us.
Well, and we've gone through a lot of reasons why this can potentially be unsafe. But Eric, because of your background too, working in Silicon Valley, and talk about the digital architecture of Flock, why do you think it's unsafe?
A couple of reasons. Flock may claim, and the same is true with other vendors in the market, that the local police agency owns the data. Well, that might be what the marketing brochure says, But if you dig into the details of the actual software license, there are loopholes that you could drive a whole fleet of Mack trucks through. So what does ownership mean? Well, in practical terms, ownership should mean control. Well, if Windsor actually had control of the data, for instance, things like encryption could be under Windsor's control. And if we wanted to withdraw our data, we could cancel the encryption keys for our particular data. The system wasn't designed that way. So from the ground up, it was all about data access, not about data privacy.
When Armand, as you learn more about this and as you're surprised even as we speak, what are you trying to do here in the advocacy space?
Well, where I've started is just to figure out what the situation is in my town. I talked to the police, talked to corporate counsel, and was able to gather information about what we have. And we have 33 fixed flock cameras around town. It was a surprise to me because I hadn't seen that number in the press.
And this is in West Hartford.
It was in West Hartford, thank you. And we have 30 squad cars equipped with ALPR as well. Now I've started learning about, okay, what are the trade-offs here? So that's where I'm at, and we're taking things a step at a time. What
was the biggest surprise for you?
The fact that there's just no public input process. This data is being harvested. I've worked as a data scientist in aerospace. There are usually hard and fast rules around what you can do with a customer's data. In this case, the public is the customer. The public is not asked to consent to the use of their data. We're not sure that there's actually much positive coming out of it besides anecdotal cases, which I will concede there's something to. But there's so much downside, and we don't even know what the unknowns are. So
the vendors are so far ahead of the municipalities. For instance, in Windsor, our police chief didn't even know that the nationwide search was enabled. It took somebody like myself with decades of software experience, and similarly for Armand, the level of citizen vigilance, it's put on the citizen. Well, I think that should be on the government. It shouldn't take a citizen with specialized knowledge to have to do this digging because we're rare. There's not a lot of us.
Well, and Matthew, I got about a minute here for this question, but I know you've been nodding during the conversation, and I want to make note that the ALPRs are not the only technology that Flock has. They're also planning to roll out a system called NOVA, which aggregates all sort of personal information for law enforcement to use. So is this something that you've heard about, and what sort of concerns do you have?
Yeah, I mean, NOVA is a new trend in police surveillance where it's going to be a platform that is going to bring together all of the data they have access to, like hundreds of data streams from different types of devices, including from competing companies that have devices that police departments have put up, but also historic footage. I mean, they're going to be pulling stuff from public records. They're going to be pulling historic body cam footage if a police body cam has ever been inside your house, or if a police drone, even en route to something else, has ever flown over your house. They can pull up a picture of your backyard if a police is responding to a call at your house. And so really, this is kind of like the complete consolidation of all information, that like all kind of firewalls that are preventing, data collected for one use from being used again for a different purpose are going to be gone. And that's the real concern.
And about 30 seconds here, Eric, any last notes that you would like our listeners to know more about?
Yes. Fortunately, the state legislature is getting involved fairly heavily in these issues. There's a House Bill 5449 that is all about dealing with ALPRs, and it is going through a lot of revisions now, but watch for that in the news.
So clearly we're going to be keeping an eye on this and following up with everyone today. You've been listening to Eric Weiner, who's a resident of Windsor. Eric, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
You're also listening to Armand Hidari, who's a resident of West Hartford. Armand, we appreciate your time as well.
Thank you.
And also Matthew Guariglia, who's a senior policy analyst for the Electric Frontier Foundation. Matthew, appreciate your time and thanks for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, glad to be on the show.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Divina Cordeiro and Isaac Moss. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.
Leave your life open. You don't have don't have to leave your life open. You don't have to hide. Someone is gathering every crumb you drop. Decisions and moments you long forgot. Is that wrong? Isn't this what